G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I'm making a clip in response to Adam Shumpus XXX's second official Termcast internet radio show, where he and Ariadne from Canada were hosting Garriott in Mendham from New Jersey. And at Forever Wolf Films in Chicago had put up a clip soliciting questions for Gary to answer. Because Adam has been supportive of me and I would like to be supportive of Adam, I put a couple of questions on the thread. Question 1 goes as follows: can you ask Gary why he keeps his temper tantrum so perilously close to the surface that he's at constant imminent risk of erupting into a fit of crankiness which alienates people, considering that he's basically attempting to engage in a political process in order to convince the world to adopt his perspective, which is that life is not worth living? That was my question. It's not what Adam asked Gary. Now, whether Amanda Forever Wolf Films completely turned that on its head before passing it on to Adam, or whether she tried to psychoanalyse me and dump my motives onto Adam to ask Gary, I don't know. But what Adam asked Gary was, Warbles wants to know if you still cherish a personal hatred against him. Did I want to know that? No, it's not what I asked. But anyway, Gary went on to answer that question and say that of course he hates me because, you know, Warbles on a lot is a bullshit artist. Warbles on a lot is a fraud. That's what Gary says. Well, no. Gary is offended that I don't agree with his alleged philosophy of anti-natalism. Gary is offended that I say anti-natalism is a failure of jurisprudence. Gary likes to think that he and his bunch of depressed atheist followers are fit to judge life on earth as being unworthy of living, and they are now wriggling around in frustration that nobody wants to agree with them. Jurisprudence was explained to me when I was 8 years old by a policeman who came to the primary school. You know, he sat on the teacher's desk, he took the ammunition out of his revolver and handed it round all the little kiddies so that we could, you know, satisfy ourselves as to what his gun was all about. And he explained that it is not a good idea to have the victims of a crime judge the guilt or innocence of the accused, let alone pronounce sentence. If somebody is accused of committing a rape, they should not be judged guilty or innocent by a bunch of rape victims. They should be judged guilty or innocent on the evidence assessed by a jury of their peers. So if life on earth is in the dock, charged as being unworthy of living, it is not a bunch of depressed atheists who think life is a constant series of miserable events who are fit to sit on the jury. They have a conflict of interest and they disqualify themselves because of their psychology. Right? And that's just a fact of life and fairness and justice. Antinatalists are not fit to judge whether life on earth is worthy of living for the rest of planet Earth. If they want to judge it for themselves, great. If they don't want to have kids, yahoo yippee. They were probably badly parented, which is why they're so fucking miserable now. They're at great risk of passing on that misery to any offspring. So if they don't want to breed, cool, don't breed. You know, no problems with that. I have problems with anti-natalists trying to convince everybody else on the planet that life is unworthy of living, because there are people who are going through transient emotional, psychological traumas who could very easily be pushed towards the suicide trap, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So yeah, I'm not in favour of antinatalism and I'm prepared to state my views on it. Gary doesn't like people tearing him down. That's how he sees it. I've spent years building this up and you want to tear it down. Well, no, I just think it's crap. But anyway, the next question I asked was, how does Gary regard at Desert File's endorsement of the SunFoil project? And Gary decided that Desert File has shot himself down in the credibility stakes because Desert File can't see that the SunFoil breaks any laws or rules of chemistry, physics, thermodynamics, electrochemical storage, photovoltaic power generation, power mechanics, power transmission, electromechanical generation. Basically, the SunFoil doesn't break any physical or scientific laws. What it does is a bit of an end run on the theory that the only reasonable way to recharge a car battery is to burn fuel in the engine and drive a torque multiplying step-up belt to turn an alternator at some speed other than it's most efficient for generating electricity. That's what the SunFoil project does. And it's not a 25 watt panel, Gary. I've never put a 25 watt panel on any car. Here's my car, and the panel is in dappled shade. And look at that, see? It's a 30 watt panel. A gallium arsenide panel that uses a different wavelength to the silicon panels, and that's why it's about 30% bigger than a 30 watt silicon panel. But it has the advantage of being better at making electricity under clouds because it uses a different wavelength of light. And if we come down here and we go in through the window, which didn't work because of the glare on the glass, but here you can see that the battery is fully charged. Right, that's what the charge controller says. And the full sunlight has not yet been on the panel this morning. The reason that the shaded panel is able to fully charge the battery is because the panel is designed to fully charge the battery on a rainy day. It's just going to take 10 hours, whereas it's going to take 2 hours of full sunlight to recharge the panel after a hypothetical 24 hours in the car park. Now, in that 24 hours in the car park, the lead acid battery is going to lose. Otherwise, if it was left to itself sitting on a rock, it would lose 1% of its stored charge to chemical sulfation. 1% of 95 amp hours is 0.95 of an amp hour, and that doesn't sound like much until you consider that the starter motor on this vehicle only uses 0.05, a 20th of an amp hour. So in sulfation, the battery loses enough energy to start the engine 19 times. And that's not the only place that current goes when the car's in the car park. There's a dashboard clock and a stereo memory chip, and I've measured them. They suck a 1/10 of an amp between them. 24 hours times a 1/10 is 2.4 amp hours. So the vehicle loses from its battery 3.35 amp hours. Right? Which has to be put back into the battery next time you start the car. You have to burn fuel to kiss and make up for the time in the car park. 3.68 amp hours. And because it's a 25% efficient engine, the alternator reaches a maximum efficiency of 50%, but it doesn't spend much time running at its peak efficient revs. So its average efficiency is 25%. And there's a 2-to-1 step up belt between the 25% efficient engine and the average 25% efficient alternator. So we wind up with an electric generating system that is 3.5% efficient at turning petroleum into electricity. 3.5%. I've got a Chinese 2-stroke electric generator that's 10% efficient. 3 times better than my car at turning petrol into electricity. It means that to get 50 amps or 1 horsepower out of my alternator at full output, I have to put 8 horsepower into the belt on average. If I'm at the right rev speed, it might be only 4 horsepower, but most of the time I'm not at the right engine alternator peak efficiency rev band. So let's work with 8 because that's the average. Now, if I had a more modern car with a bigger electrical system, a 120 amp alternator, a 5-speed gearbox, so it's going to have a 3-to-1 step up, that electric generating efficiency would drop from 3.5 to 2.25%. So a modern car is going to be a quarter as efficient as my Chinese 2-stroke generator at turning fuel into electricity. When you consider that to cruise on flat highway, this car only uses 25 horsepower to push the air out of the way and 1/3 of a horsepower for all the rolling resistance of the bearings and the wheels, that putative 8 horsepower going into the alternator is a very large fraction. If you consider that the battery is, by dint of my 6.5 minute average engine run time, and the alternator doesn't have time to put more than 70% of a charge into the battery in 6.5 minutes, the battery stabilises at being 30% flat after 100 days or 3 months. And I've discovered that the flatness of the battery at rest equals the percentage of the fuel burn going into the battery. Because the flatter the battery, the shorter the average engine run time. And the greater the percentage at your short average run times, which generally means you're doing 50 k's in town, 5 horsepower to push the actual car around with a gearbox, and you may be putting anywhere from 3 to 15 horsepower into the belt to run the alternator, to kiss and make up to the battery. So having a solar panel saves you having to run any petrol through the engine to finish recharging it from last time, because that's what the solar panel's done. Any attempt to suggest the solar panel can't help the fuel burn situation is predicated on wrong assumptions. Like the idea that it only works when the engine's running, whereas it's working right now, and the car's been sitting here for 2 days. Alright? Gary also got the shits at me for calling him an idiot for his suggestion that a car should have a wind turbine in the radiator grille so that it could be used for regenerative braking by connecting the wind mill, as I call it. And there's no semantic difference between a windmill and a wind turbine. Connecting the electric windmill to the battery, he thought he could generate energy by braking the car, because when you're driving the car downhill there's an awful lot of kinetic energy stored in it. But Gary, how many people drive their car downhill all day? You can roll the car downhill and recapture some of the energy that you burnt in the engine to push it back up the hill. I would submit that any car with a fixed base of operation spends exactly as much time driving uphill as it does driving downhill on any daily, weekly or monthly cycle. Otherwise, you'd have to go somewhere else with it every day, wouldn't you? However, you want to measure the ridiculousness of Gary's ideas? Here we have a wind turbine with an electric generator, and we've put it on the radiator grille just so he can see how much it increases the drag profile of the car and how much energy it's going to make. 3 parts of 2/10 of 5/16 of sweet fuck all, Gary. Ridiculous idea. If you want to use aerodynamics to brake the car, then what you're going to have is a series of parachutes across the back, and every time you put your foot on the brake you're going to pop a parachute 28-foot diameter, just like the drag cars use, to try and slow down from 160 or 180 miles an hour to, less than 60 miles an hour, so that they're not going to burn their brakes out trying to stop on the short end of the drag strip. And then you're going to have to either cut the parachute loose and ignore it, treat it as pollution, or stop your car entirely and repack the parachute for next time. No, Gary, aerodynamics is not a way of regeneratively braking a motor car. It is a foolish idea. Only an idiot would suggest it. As for the idea that solar panels have to be exactly perpendicular, otherwise you don't make any power out of them, well, using that cigarette lighter as a gnomon to assure perpendicularity, we've got 2.22 volts open circuit. We have 2.2 amps open circuit, and that is a 12 volt 5 amp motor drawing 0.8 of an amp with 19 volts. Same panel flat, 21.11 volts, 1.7 amps. 0.8 of an amp, the motor's slightly slower, 17.2 volts. So, the difference between flat and perpendicular at 10 o'clock in the morning is around about 10-15%. Gary, that's all the difference that it makes. And because the SunFoil is thermosiphon cooled, and cooling a solar panel increases its power output by as much as 30%. This reaches its 1.69 amp maximum power even when flat. I'm right because I've done the experiment. Ciao.